Welcome back to Marcelian Online. The new year is upon us, and we have a debacle, a choosing of the sides. Is it the Force or is it the dark side?
Between Frost and Unholy DK.
Which is which? Why is why? I think this video will probably cover more than enough for you to like make a decision if you're interested on playing DK and if you want to go for the absolute meta or go very deep down the rabbit's hole to just prove everyone that even quote-unquote, and it's a very big quote, underdogs can do very well.
That's basically a discussion about what it means to actually go for the flavor of the month and what if you take these two specs, because they're actually doing really well. I mean, you've seen Unholy in the MDI and you've seen Frost DK everywhere else.
You've seen Unholy in the MDI in 2 dungeons. That's it.
But still, and people have started playing it since. Funny how that works, and like why? And especially for people that are playing either of these two specs and they're like, I cannot just do any damage. Like, why does that happen? Well, let's talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the old picking between a meta comp, a meta spec, and something you really enjoy playing is really a problem of actually getting into groups and whatever, because people will be influenced by this. So if you're playing an Unholy DK, for example, like mostly solo, but you're really good at it, you'll still probably gonna have a lot of issues getting into pucks. That's the reality of it.
That's definitely something that's not gonna go away no matter what spec you play. And it's also, I mean, we do have to point out the fact that even if you go for an off-meta spec, that doesn't necessarily that it's going to be successful. That doesn't mean it's going to be successful all the time.
No, for sure. But Unholy is successful.
Yeah, that's the thing, because we're talking about Unholy. We can talk about other specs that have a lot of issues that will, even if you play them really well, there's only so much you can do. That's just the reality of the situation. But most of the time, even that is usually enough. But when you look at the DPS meters and you see that everybody else is doing about 30-40% more than you, then you'll probably feel pretty poop.
Yeah, the thing is, like when we do our groups, and you can see it in a lot of the footage on the screen, like this is a prime example where you take a spec, you like play it and study it and research it and optimize it to the best of your capacity. You're not required to do that. This is not something that it will be a major drawback for you to like actually enjoy playing Unholy DK. But if you do decide to go that step further, you basically will be able to perform very in a how could I put this? So you're gonna be very relaxed while performing great and actually even outperforming some quote-unquote meta specs. This is the case which has happened to me, but again, I went that further step. Like I always like go to sims, I go to builds, I talk with theory crafters, I send them my logs and stuff, so I try to get the best I can out of it. I'm a geek like that.
That's good. Okay, I did want to ask you this, because we can start with Unholy as well, because a lot of people probably have similar questions between other specs, but this is the first video. Maybe we'll have more in the future, who knows. But talking about Unholy, how long did it take you to get to a point where you can just like destroy the meters like consistently in every dungeon that we do, and raids as well? But dungeons are more,
raid is a different story.
Yeah, that's different.
It's totally different. No. I think it started like with the changes. So it wasn't the case back in Dragonflight, not all the time, because you had Mokti on the Red Paladin and you cannot really compete with that. But it all started with the rework in the War Within, where the spec made much more sense in terms of its cooldowns, and its rotation, at least on the surface, got a little bit more easier. But in order to like do it right, you still have to like manage a lot of stuff. So once I understood that, okay, it does seem to be easy, but you have to like understand what's your priority, and you actually now have like impactful buttons, much more impactful. It started to click, and it started to be much more like I used to play it in the War Within. I used to play it as I would in Dragonflight, right? We're like always trying to calculate everything to be on point and everything like that. But that was not the case anymore. It was more now a situation where you're with an abundance of resources, and you cannot really know for sure which button to press next because you have everything available, right? Okay. So once I understood that, okay, priority is much more important now as opposed to like calculating or playing behind things like Festermite as in the past, for example, I became much more relaxed and understood that like if you respect your priority right and manage your resources correctly, because you can still manage them in a way that you cannot get like super overloaded. You get way more resources now, like runic power, wounds, all of that. But if you want to optimize, like the minute I understand like you can optimize perfectly and also use your priority abilities in the proper way, that's when I started to like feel, you know, the numbers go up and up and up and up and up.
I mean,
so
it shows.
It took I believe a couple of months. I think it's also a gear situation as well, because like when you get much more better gear, but it was like even without the gear, like when we started off up until this point, it felt good because I always love a spec, and this is Unholy's case, where I get into it, I feel I'm doing good, but there's always room for better and better and better and better.
Oh, that's probably true for a lot of things.
Not everybody's vibing with this type of playstyle. Some people prefer like, you know, just plug and go basically, which is also fine. But Unholy not being a meta spec necessarily, if you wanted to do good, you have to go that step beyond.
That's true. Okay, we had actually a recent comment on a video that gave me an idea for this, and I wanted to ask you as well. There was somebody that was obviously struggling a lot playing Unholy and getting a lot of damage out, and the comment essentially said that he was essentially following all the rotations, all the guys. That's what the comment said. We don't know 100% if that's what that person did, but that just popped into my head right now. And I was gonna ask you, like, when you go, because in raids everything is pretty much scripted. You pretty much have the same rotation always. You follow the rotation. It's a lot more static. But in Mythic Plus, you sometimes, I mean, I don't know if you do as Unholy, but sometimes you have to adapt to, how big are we pulling now? When do I need my cooldown, stuff like that. So what I wanted to ask you is, like, when you go into, let's say, at the start of a dungeon like Necrotic Wake, you go into a big pool.
Good example.
Yeah, because we actually had that just recently, and we both played our DK, and you can probably see it on the meters, the difference in damage, and we'll talk about that as well. But what goes through your head? Like, what do you think is like, okay, I need to do this, I need to do that? Like, what's going on in the Unholy brain?
Well, first of all, if I want to go that in depth with,
like an example,
the first thing I do is actually put my focus target to be able to kick. So if we could talk Necrotic Wake, that's the first thing I do, because since in that dungeon I knew we were playing Frost, and I know during Breath, you know, you're like kind of stuck with things. I need to make sure I do that. Now, when I see there's a big pack coming, and usually that's either at the start of the dungeon or when the big pull. So I have already my cooldown. So it's a situation of getting a target which is like really juicy and big.
Okay.
So
big fat targets.
Yeah. So it doesn't die. Well, the thing is, like, I do that because if it dies really quick, then my wounds, you know, they're still there. I have to like blow. You don't play that much on the wound gameplay in dungeons necessarily. I do because I'm a freak, and I want to get the max possible, right? So basically, I see the big pack, right? I have my focus target, I have my juicy target selected. I put on my beautiful ability, Defile,
the most beautiful ability.
And then I start into my opener, which is much easier on the site build. On the festering site, where you don't play Vile Contagion. You know, we can talk about that as well. So that opener is super easy. Basically, you pop everything, and you just have to be aware of two things. One, when you have the icy chains on the big juicy target, make sure you drop everything and spam
That's
on
Rider
that.
of the Apocalypse, right?
Yeah, it's Rider of the Apocalypse, right? It will blast a lot of AoE, and once you get the Festering Side proc, that at some point it will replace your Festering Strike, and you have to hit that shit immediately. It's a big cleave damage. It's really cool animation, and it deals a lot of damage, right? So these are the two things that you are mostly like I would say be aware of and don't negate. That's on the priority. Then you have your other procs like Sudden Doom and all that. That's cool, but it's a basic gameplay of maintaining your Defile on the ground and that buff, making sure that most of the mobs are in that, so you can cleave your Curse Strikes in, spamming Epidemic as well. And in terms of like wounds, it's important to have wounds, but if you have your Abomination up, you're gonna passively get them. So you don't have to worry too much. Like if you have 2 wounds on that target, it doesn't really, it's not that problematic. Even if you don't have wounds, if there's like everything on the ground, Defile, diseases everywhere, all of that, you can just go for Epidemic and even pop your Scourge Strikes without wounds on the target. You'll still do absolutely great. Sometimes I'm a crazy freak and I still get some wounds, but
that's how I used to play Unholy as well.
As opposed to Vile Contagion. Vile Contagion was much more build-up oriented, and I switched from that. Well, I switched from that because at the beginning we were doing lowish keys, and most of the targets died. Like if the more quote-unquote complicated build, it's not that complicated, but it does require a bigger setup. you have to have the targets live for longer because you want to spread those wounds like as many as possible, and then you just start blasting, and that's like the quadratic scaling and all of that. So that's really good.
Sure.
But I've seen a lot of people just switch entirely because it's a pain. Usually, like even high key pushers now, if you're gonna look at Unholy DK logs, like they play with specs that melt groups anyway, so it's not really that efficient anymore. Vile Contagion is fun, right? It's like how you would deliver on that fantasy of Unholy, like spreading all of the diseases and the wounds on everything, and then just pop all the pustules everywhere. It's just amazing. The fantasy's there, and the numbers show. It's like everything around.
I do have to say that ever since I've played Unholy on beta, I was so curious to play it on live as well. Just never got to. And by the time I leveled my DK, we had this idea of like, okay, let's see if we can compete Frost. Because the whole reason why this video came about was because I asked you like, dude, why don't you just try Frost every now and again?
I tried it.
Frost is meta. Yeah. And you said, well, I mean, you had your opinions about Frost, whether it's boring or not. That's fine.
It's boring, yeah.
But I think there's a lot of the things that Frost players don't understand, and this is probably
we're switching to Frost now.
Sure. We can talk a little bit about Frost, because this was kind of like a wake-up call to me, and kind of like what it means to be a meta spec. So Frost DK is probably one of the most diva specs that I've ever played in Mythic Plus.
Unholy used to be that as well.
Yeah, I remember, and I didn't know how diva it was, because obviously Frost DK is like a meta spec, and I hopped into it. Okay, first of all, because I wanted to try it out. Second of all, because I wanted to see if we can like duke it out.
Yeah, well, I have to give Frost its flowers here, because there's no comparison between Frost and Unholy when it comes to like cleave damage. Like up to like 5 targets, Frost will outshine Unholy.
Yeah,
like, at the similar item level and all of that, it will outshine. Like Unholy still has no cleave. Like
there are very few specs that scale in large uncapped AoE as much as Unholy does. Probably Destro might give you a run for your money.
Yeah, Destro for sure.
Maybe Fire Mage in very, very high pulls, but that's probably not with the current tuning. But with that being said, going into Frost, I have obviously had to level. Like I still, even if you're watching the footage right now, I'm probably at least 13 item levels under you. What's your item level currently?
I'm 634 to 5 now.
Okay, so 14. I'm 620.
That's a big difference.
And this is just in the recent dungeons, right? But it's probably because of the gearing system. I just couldn't get the gear fast enough to actually duke it out. It takes way too long.
Yeah.
Maybe in future patches. But I went into it and I've played Shattered Frost. I've played dual two-hander Rider of the Apocalypse. It was really cool. But Breath of Sindragosa is basically the build that you want. It's a very efficient build, but you need to have everything catered to it. And in the necrotic wake that you were just mentioning, I have a problem where I don't kick as much. That would help, but other than that,
it gives you runic power.
Yeah, it gives runic power. It's also a global. It doesn't give that much runic power as opposed to an obliterate, as far as a global is concerned. But when it comes to the damage, you're kind of locked in. You need a very specific tank that knows how to pull around your Breath of Sindragosa. You need particular parties that can take over stuns and CCs and other stuff. Obviously, you can still do stuff, but the more you do in Breath, the higher the chances are that you're going to drop your Breath. And that's not so the whole purpose of Frost, which is why I think it's a little bit more complex. Now with Deathbringers, you have to juggle your cooldowns and you have to prep your resources ahead of time, which is something that you kind of did before, but you didn't really care that much of. At least it doesn't feel like you care as much about it as you do now. And because you have all of these conditions, first of all, you have to be able to not have to move away from your target, stick on the target. It has to be alive for at least 1 full minute, which doesn't really happen if you don't do higher and higher keys. Yep. Obviously, if you play with burst specs, like Unholy has a lot of burst, well, has more than Frost does. I think in this dungeon we played with Beastmaster, with Sunshade, and she was like doing 6-7 million AoE damage. That was still a lot. And if you play with Reds and other stuff, it's going to be very hard to dish out those damage. Like some of the top Unholy Frost DKs that play in their group, they have an augmentation. That's probably what you're seeing in the logs and in the rankings and in the tier lists. Obviously, augmentation doesn't do damage per se, and they're probably playing with an enhancement as well, which doesn't really have a lot of burst, just has high consistent damage. And as far as I know, enhancement doesn't scale in AoE the way that Unholy does, so you're still going to end up having an efficient damage profile. But whenever you're playing lower keys, that's gonna be lost. And if you're having difficulties playing Frost DK, and usually any meta spec, but this is a good example with Frost DK, you need to understand that it's meta for a reason. This is for people who hop into flavor of the month. This is for you if you're inviting a meta spec. You need to understand that even though that person is playing meta, or if you're playing meta, you're not automatically the best DPS in your group. Sure, you have the potential to be so, but there are reasons why they work, and people tend to forget that when they look at, I don't want to say MDA because MDA is a little bit different, but when they look at, streamers and content creators that just do.
People are getting influenced by what they see in the MDI. This is the truth. It always happens. Like,
but that's fine as long as you understand why it works, why people are using Unholy in Necrotic Wake and doing 15 million DPS.
Yeah, but
right?
It's also like a situation of the pool count. It's a situation of like actually getting to play with a tank that knows exactly what your spec is doing, like in the example of Frost Decay.
Yeah.
And this is part of the reason why I didn't want. So I was so fed up with Unholy being such dependent external buff class that like knowing like anything that would be required from any other player for me to
just want it to be self-sufficient.
Exactly. And this is what I have a problem with Frost Decay. It's a meta spec, but it's so dependent like on everybody in your party. It's just like, dude, I don't want that. I played that last expansion. I don't want that anymore.
Yeah,
now, I'll do give it because it's not as easy as it was. It's not as boring as it was in the past. I'll give it that, especially like when during breath. I mean, I can sense that high octane feel going through, and it's a beautiful thing, right? I just like if you always want to go meta, like Frost Decay, I think is the prime example. It doesn't always necessarily mean that this spec can carry itself all by its own. Yeah, and this is true for a lot of specs.
Yeah, this is true because obviously I'm not a main Frost DK, I'm a main Fire Mage, and Fire Mage is not a meta
spec. But we did this for an experiment.
Yeah, right? this is essentially for an experiment. But what was interesting is that with Fire, I did practice a lot of Fire, so I would like to think that I'm better on Fire than I am on Frost DK, even though Fire is like 10 times more complex. I got the hang of how it works. Like, what do I need to kick? When do I need my CCs? How do I use my cooldowns and stuff like that? And going into Frost DK, I try to apply kind of like the same logic. Okay, I do have a breath, and I have a 45-second damage profile with Pillar and Death and the Reaper's Mark, and obviously I don't want to hold my cooldowns too long. I want to match them together. I want the target to live, like all of these obvious things. But there's so many more minutia, so many more details of little things that you have to take into consideration. Like you cannot stun, you cannot CC, you cannot.
You're basically locked in. You're basically locked in. So and it's very important to like keep on the target. This is another crucial thing. And for a melee spec who does not play Rider of the Apocalypse, it can be problematic.
That's yeah. So like, normally you can get away without having to min-max every little bit. But when it comes to something that's like Frost Decay, if you're not aware of the amount of min-maxing you have to do, you're probably not going to do a lot of damage. If you've had trouble playing a meta spec or any type of spec for that matter, and you're not dishing out damage even though you're following the guides, you're doing the rotation, you have all the gear, all the good stats, and it's still not coming out, there's probably something more going into it. And this is where ideally playing something that you like comes into play. That can be a meta spec. It doesn't have to be an underdog or whatever, but
it can be Frost Decay. You like it, you play it.
Sure.
That's cool. That's cool. I think the question in the debacle is like, okay, what do you go for? Do you go for the meta spec or do you go for the one you like? The one you like. If it's one and the same thing, that's a match made in heaven.
Yeah,
okay, that's cool. But if it's not the same thing and you feel like, okay, I'm playing Frost Decay, but I'm not doing the damage I've seen on streams and on MDI. I play Unholy DK, but I'm not doing the damage I've seen on streams and MDI. So that's the debacle. And like, if you're gonna do a Frost Decay example, just be sure that you will have the proper partners to at least deliver on that experience you're expecting for. If you're gonna play a spec like Unholy Decay, you're not dependent on anybody, obviously. But if you want to perform better, you have to go that extra step and optimize and get feedback and try to look a little bit beyond what's on a written guide. Let's say it's
just because somebody's playing a meta spec doesn't necessarily mean that you're gonna get what you're expecting from that person.
And I think we've said this through the years. Like, we have seen so many examples where people in our groups that are playing a spec like for years, or they're just playing that and not caring about any flavor of the month meta, whatever, those people tend to play much better and obtain much better results than flavor of the month switchy boys that just follow the trend, right? So
especially in these seasons where kicks are so important, the spells are so important, so everything's so punishing. Like you need
the issue is still bugging. That's the issue.
Yeah,
that's the problem. That the biggest thing. Like we can make a million videos regarding this topic. People will still not get into groups because they're not playing the meta spec. This is we don't know how to fix that. It's probably something. I mean, we talked about it so many years. I'm fed up. I'm just tired of this subject.
Yeah,
like, people just need to accept other specs in their groups. Goddamn.
Well, this is our attempt to, put a little bit of a spotlight on Unholy, but also on Frost DK as well, to see exactly, sure, you can play meta spec, but you might have to do a little bit more research. Sure, you can play an underdog spec, you just have to practice a little bit more.
Optimize, yeah.
Yeah, so it all comes down to how much you put into it. If you want to perform, the reality is you'll have to practice it a little bit more. Sometimes it's intuitive, you can just go and you don't really care. Sometimes you have to okay, why does it work the way it does for all of those people? Because we're always going to have meta, we're always going to have discrimination, we're always going to have people not inviting certain specs. But the problem with this, and this is true in any competitive scene, even especially in gaming, of course, is sometimes things work because of a certain reason, and that doesn't trickle down. So meta trickles down from the top, rank 1, augmentation evoker, prop paladin, but it doesn't trickle down why it works. Where are they using their stuns? How many CC do they have? What kind of cooldowns do they use? And does the synergy between the comp work and what that enables, right? That's a discussion that not a lot of people have, and people just blindly follow a particular spec and they're just like, oh, but they're doing well, why am I not doing well, right?
Exactly. And you cannot really if you have doing your +10s or whatever, cannot really expect to have that. Doesn't the meta that you're seeing, it doesn't apply to +10s. You can play +10s with whatever spec you want, man.
Sure.
It's all good. Don't be that guy who doesn't invite the I don't know super
ferals. Windwalkers.
Ferals. Doesn't matter. The Unholy DKs. No, that doesn't really matter. Like in a +10, every spec can do great. Okay, this is not a race. The meta is applied only on I don't know, +16s and above. I would dare to say. The rest of it, it's all good. It will any spec will work, meta or not. All right.
So, at least in our conclusion right now, I do have to say that I don't know what your opinion is, but we're probably having the same opinion. So I'm just gonna say mine, and you can say yours. If we're gonna have a duke it out, one versus the other, I think I will definitely give it to Unholy this time around, because it's way more approachable as a new player. If you always had this dynamic of, okay, I want to play DK, which one do I go? What's the better DPS? I would definitely recommend going 100% Unholy. Even though Frost is fun and it's meta, I feel like Unholy probably solves 99% of the problems or things that you want to solve as a DPS player going into.
For sure, it's actually way less punishing if you're beginning, so you won't see your many mistakes whatsoever. If you want to really do good, then you have to notice those. I would give it to Unholy as well with a bonus. I still enjoyed playing Frost when I did. I think Frost its most benefit for me is its spells feel much more impactful. Now that doesn't mean Unholy is not impactful in the spells, but it's different. It's a different vibe. When I play Unholy, I feel my diseases and popping the wounds are doing the thing. It's not it's small things adding up. When you're playing Frost, it's you're there. You're obliterating stuff. That's
still a good feeling. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's this is the I cannot give it just to Unholy.
Sure.
I still like to switch to Frost from time to time just to do that playstyle because it is cool. It is wintry. It is icy. It is
It's in theme of the season. And listen, if you want to see more versus videos with more different specs where we can duke it out on different specs and come up with some talking points and some clarifications, if you decide to leave a main, put us in the comments, hit the like button on it, and we'll see whichever one gets more traction, more comments, more likes, or whatever. We're probably gonna end up putting it on a video.
Yeah, exactly. And if not, just click on Flame over there and check out this video, because both Frost and Unholy need their healers, and you want to know which are the most fun. Click there. Thank you. Bye.